Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandra Greenberg, and this is Insight into Wellness. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, my guest is Ursula Pottinga. She is a Neuro-Transformational Coach, and we're going to be talking about right and left hemisphere integration, a key to wellness and prosperity. A little bit about Ursula. She is a certified professional coactive coach and consultant to the hospitality industry. She is an experienced neurotransformational coach with clients in business, education, and nonprofits, as well as a masterful workshop designer and facilitator. Born in Germany, Ursula has lived and worked all over the world and now shares her time between Florida and Minneapolis. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here, Alexandra, and I am in Minneapolis today, escaping the heat in Florida. So it's a beautiful day, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. And I just love starting off these conversations, just diving into a little bit about you. And one question I love to start with is, were holistic practices a part of your childhood? And if not, when did that enter your life and take force?
That is a really, really good question. I was born and raised in Germany, and then spent a good 10 years in Europe. And I'm old, so this dates back, quite sort of my formative years, the late 60s, early 70s. And so I think that for context in regards to holistic living, that's probably useful because in those days, especially in Germany, just when I think about food, you have the small bakery where the bread is baked right there. The wheat and everything comes from the farmer that lives down the road. The butcher is a farmer. So the way I grew up is really these very small shops that provide and grow in many ways their own food. And so, and mom, who was a homemaker, and she ran my dad's business, she didn't use preserved anything. Everything was made from scratch. And so I think that is how I grew up, and that's how I love to still cook and live. Walking, fresh air, exercise, all that was a part of my upbringing. And then later on, as I became a coach, and the coaching industry is, I think, from a sort of holistic living perspective, really aware of that. And so when I became a coach, that expanded then into mindfulness and meditation. And then at the neuroscience studies, well, once you start learning about your brain and what the brain needs in regards
No going back.
to all that, you really realize that it is so important to sleep well, to eat well, to exercise, to be in good relationship and all that. So that's been my journey. But, I was really inspired by, my childhood and by mom to, live naturally in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what it means to be a neurotransformational coach.
Yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah. Sounds exciting.
So yeah, it is exciting. And so what I say is that I provide a user's manual to the human brain to my clients.
Give me
And
one.
yeah,
Give me one of
anyone.
those.
Yeah, right. To my clients, people in my workshops, my students, because I find that when you understand how the brain connects with the heart, connects with the body, how that whole system that we carry with us, both in our head as well as in our bodies, when you know what the connections are there and the huge impact that chemicals have on the functioning and the well-being of you, clarity of thinking, empathy, decision making, um, that all plays a huge role in regards to how effective you are. And not only that, but also that kind of knowledge helps people access higher levels of consciousness, which I think is, and that's where the transformation comes in. So the neuro is for the brain, the transformation is using neuroscience for the sake of having people be more awake, more present, and really look to become more conscious.
It's always so interesting to me, um, to see someone who's worked so much yourself working with the brain. How have you used this in your life? Like, that is
You know,
always so interesting to
it's
think.
so interesting. You know, we are talking, I mean, it's August 2020. We are still in the middle of a pandemic. You know, COVID has hit the world and has created stressors for, you know, many people to varying degrees. And what I have found is that because I have been working with the tools that my business partner Anne and I have created for our students, that I've been using these tools probably now for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So my brain has that neuroplasticity. It has that neural pathway already. It had that, you know, before this crisis hit. It's used to thinking in this way, so that when something challenging like this happens, it's a lot easier for me to really check in with myself and go, you know, what stresses do I have? How does my body feel? Am I distracted? Am I sad? Am I, you know, am I losing things? Am I bumping into things? These are all signals that
Mm-hmm.
my brain isn't integrated and it's not working as well. Or, you know, looking at relationships, you know, am I irritable? Am I not present? Have I lost empathy? All these things are hints that something in regards to my brain system isn't quite lined up. And so that knowledge has really, really helped me get through and be with this pandemic
Mm-hmm.
in a way that the stress isn't taking over. I mean, I still have days when it's not all good, but I think I have more days that I feel just normal and right and present and productive. And it is just because I've used these tools, you know, for so
For
many
so
years. There's
long.
just a natural neuroplasticity that my brain has, and I am really deeply grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Let's kind of dive into the right, the left hemisphere. If you could break down the difference between the two, and well, I have so many questions, but let's start there.
Yes, okay, let me do that. So first of all, before we break down right hemisphere and left hemisphere, let me make clear that
Mm.
human beings are not right hemisphere or left hemisphere people.
Okay.
Most of the things that we do involve both hemispheres. Whatever we do, if you were to put my head under a brain scanner right now, you would see firing on both sides of my brain. What is true, though, is that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere process information and see the world very differently. And the reason why we know this is from either brain injury that a person has lost or has impaired functioning on one side or the other, that then gives us a clue what's missing. And this is how we've in neuroscience have been finding out what the right and left hemisphere actually do and what their jobs are.
Mm-hmm.
We have really followed and admire an amazing neuroscientist called Dr. Ian McGilchrist. He's from England. He wrote a book, The Master and His Emissary. And it is a very detailed look at the hemispheres. And so, among other things, we've studied Ian McGilchrist and read his book and looked at, okay, what is really going on in here? So the way the left hemisphere processes the world is really it looks at specifics. It is in charge of planning and organizing and categorizing.
Mm-hmm.
And the right hemisphere looks at the bigger picture. It processes music, poetry, metaphors, and has a deep connection to what's going on in the body. So there's two very different sort of information processes
Yeah.
that we have in our brain. And one way how we always illustrate this is through a little experiment that I want to do with you.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Okay, so put your finger in front of your nose,
Okay.
like that, and focus on your finger. And now sort of what happens to the background as you look at your finger?
It's definitely blurrier.
Blurrier. So that is left hemisphere processing. It focuses in on your finger, and so the background gets blurry, sort of vanishes. So the focus is on the finger.
Mm-hmm.
Now look past your finger and look at the background.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on that, sort of the bigger picture of what you're seeing. What's happening to your finger?
I can barely see it.
You can barely see it. That's right hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
So the right hemisphere takes in all the information. It takes in new information, looks at all the trees, while the left hemisphere focuses on one tree and one branch and one thing. So there is a gift in that, because the left hemisphere knows how to filter things out, things that it doesn't find useful, it doesn't want to focus on, it just sort of discards it.
Mm-hmm.
And the right hemisphere just takes it all in. So the challenge then is, when the right hemisphere takes everything in, it can get really overwhelming. So
Definitely.
when there is a right hemisphere, let's say a person has been rewarded more for right hemisphere processing, has more neural pathways along those lines, that overwhelm can become a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge of the left hemisphere, because it's so specific and looks so at one thing, it can get really rigid and very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So in our work, we say the effective and the gifts of the right hemisphere is bigger picture and freedom. The effective version of the left hemisphere is structure.
Hmm.
And the ineffective way of the right hemisphere is chaos. And what shows up in the left hemisphere is rigidity.
Yes.
So when we are finding ourselves in one spot or the other, what is actually needed for the brain is the opposite. So if we are in overwhelm and it's like, oh my God, it's all too much and it's all coming at me and I don't know what decision to make, we need to engage the effective part of the left hemisphere by narrowing something down and saying, okay, what is one thing that I can do right now? Not the 15 things that are coming at me, but the one thing. And that calms down the brain, creates brain integration, and makes that brain more effective. And the opposite is true. If we find ourselves in this, this is the rule and this is the policy and this is how we're doing it, it's either this way or the highway, that is that narrow view of the left hemisphere. And what is needed then is looking at the bigger picture and literally asking, well, what else is at stake here? What is the bigger picture of this relationship or this thing that I'm doing right now?
Yeah. Would you say then that we're trying to find this term? I've used it, and maybe I've used it in a little bit of ignorance, but this coherence. Are we trying to find coherence between the two hemispheres, or are we just trying to find, oh, if we're over here, we need to be over here a little bit, and if we're over here too much, we need to be over here?
I love the word coherence. I think as human beings, whether it's from the hemispheres or in other ways, and for you as a, holistic expert and teacher, that the body is always looking for equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
And this the same is true for the brain. It is looking for this effective balance that makes us more connected, clearer, more grounded human beings. Now, in neuroscience, it's called brain integration. So that's just the neuroscience term for this well functioning right and left hemisphere, where the firing across the hemispheres is faster, it's stronger, where people can really be with bigger picture as well as with specifics. and not going over too much into one area, area or the other, be it overwhelm, or being narrow focus. So you're absolutely right. We are looking for equilibrium. We're looking for coherence, and from a brain perspective, what we're wanting is brain integration. So using both hemispheres
Yeah.
is the key.
So you mentioned neuroplasticity, the idea that we are able to grow neurons and new pathways and present new ideas and patterns in our lives. When you are starting to work with someone, what is that foundational step or even idea thought process to actually have that brain coherence or integration?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Um, I think my work and the work of most coaches is really the first step is awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So once people are aware what is happening in their brains, it's so much easier to go, okay, is this how I want to do it? Is this effective? Are the results that I'm wanting in my life, is that what I'm getting, or is it not? And if it's not, looking at what's missing and what needs to be changed. And this is where neuroplasticity comes in. Over years, every thought, every action that's repetitive in any kind of way will create a strong neural pathway. It's a little bit like here in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, we get a lot of snow in the winter. And I always say is like after a big snowstorm, going down to the mailbox to get the mail is hard.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I walk along that same route down to the mailbox, the easier it's going to be getting the mail. And in the brain, it's the same thing. The narrower, the thinner the neural pathway, the less strong the connections, the harder it is going to be. The stronger the connections, the thicker the neural pathway, the easier it is for the brain to send the electrical impulse down there. And the problem with those thicker neural pathways, especially if you don't want them,
Mm-hmm. Yes,
if it's an
yes.
if it's a pathway that you
Listening.
don't want to walk along anymore, if it's a well-worn, well-grooved neural pathway, it helps the brain conserve energy because the firing is easier, because the neural pathway is thicker.
So strong.
And this is why change can be so hard. The brain automatically wants to send the firing down the thicker neural pathway because that is what it's used to, and that will help it conserve energy. So whatever change people are trying to make, I'm always saying, and you have to be patient because you've been doing this, whatever this is, for years, and it's not going to happen overnight that you are recreating and making these new connections and then think that it's going to be easy for your brain to fire along those lines. It will take time.
Yeah, that time, that repetitiveness,
Yeah.
is that really the one thing, the most powerful thing to create change? Is that just repetitive, keep doing the
Yes.
new thing?
Yeah.
That's really what we
Yeah.
that's what we
Yeah,
have.
it's like, if you think about a habit, that you've been trying to integrate. I'm thinking of a habit. I mean, I have been trying to journal more as a habit.
Mm-hmm.
So I have, my other habits sort of well in place, make tea, meditate, do some exercise, take the dog for a walk. And then I, open my computer and there are emails. And before I know, I'm in there, and the habit of journaling has sort of, fallen by the
Yeah.
wayside. So I've been trying on and off to do this. Um, but because it is not a very strong connection yet, I sort of forget. My brain forgets and it does other things. So there are some keys to really help your brain, help anyone's brain rewire itself. And funnily enough, nutrition, sleep, novelty, mindfulness,
Hmm.
and personal relevance
Yes.
are some of the key factors to help people change. And I think the personal relevance one is
Mm-hmm.
probably the biggest.
Tell us more about that.
if it, so I've been thinking, well, what is your problem, Ursula, with not journaling? Like, you do everything else, but
Yeah.
journaling is like, what's the problem there?
Mhm.
And so it feels like it's just not important enough
Mhm.
for me. It's just I like doing it, and I think it's cool and it's wonderful when I do it, but it's the strong desire, the strong motivator that comes from personal relevance is just not there. And so the brain has a little bit of a harder time making that habit stick, while eating well, exercising, and then certainly taking the dog for a walk, that has personal relevance, because
Yeah.
if I don't, the dog will be very unhappy and there's a price to pay.
So when you're stuck in that, like that relevance, would you say what part of the brain is really activated there?
Yeah, really, that's a really good, another really good question. So, um, I think what helps us be motivated is through dopamine,
Mhm.
which is the reward neurotransmitter. So when we are doing things that are rewarding, that neurotransmitter gets activated. And it also gets activated in anticipation of a reward, in anticipation of something that we are wanting, a specific result that we are wanting, wanting to see. So it really is a motivator towards a future goal that feels wonderful and joyful and delightful and rewarding. So it's really, for people that are listening to us, it's really personal relevance and reward are interconnected.
Mhm.
So if you want to change something, it's really looking at, well, what is the reward I'm going to get? I mean, I know my rewards from exercise. I know what my physical rewards are for that. I know what my rewards are for, meditation, and, many other things. I've just haven't quite gotten to what is the reward that I'm going to get through journaling.
Mhm.
So I think there is a huge connection there, because that dopamine, influence will help the brain really keep at it. So it might be just looking at, who do you want to be as a person? Do you, what kind of a energy do you want to have? What kind of values do you want to honor, that helps people connect to this is the reason why I do it. This is the reason why I really want that, where the desire is there, and where the desire is, the motivation and the dopamine will follow.
Yeah, we I think I've been hearing gratitude, that word, more and more and more. And I hear have gratitude, and this is a very positive, high vibrating feeling. At least in Ayurveda, high vibrating feelings bring a lot of health to the body. What's
Yes.
happening in the brain when we have these, higher vibrating ideals? How is that same just dopamine reaction? Is that helping? That obviously is helping us towards goals.
Yeah, well, and I think what you're speaking to, in regards to higher vibration, is what I was sort of mentioning earlier on. Is that the more integrated the brain is, the more access we have to higher levels of consciousness or higher levels of vibration,
Mm-hmm.
because the stress chemicals that are being released, such as adrenaline and cortisol, are greatly reduced the more the brain is functioning as a team. And so then we can really sort of connect to, I mean, I think we can only connect to gratitude if our brain is clear enough,
Mm.
and does is not it doesn't have the impairment from stress chemicals that really creates some dysfunction, including, goal orientation, empathy, memory, that those are all higher functionings of the prefrontal cortex. And if that is impaired by too many stress chemicals, we're going to have a really hard time thinking about gratitude or getting our heart into this higher heart vibration. So this whole integration, brain integration, and then brain, heart, gut, body connection,
Mm-hmm.
that all that's all integration. I mean, we're just talking about the brain that's in the head right now,
Mm-hmm.
and not even about the neurons that we have in our brain, in our heart, and the neurons that we have in our gut.
Yeah.
So gut health is huge. That, if our body is inflamed by uh, sugar, or other things that we eat that's not necessarily good for us in regards to inflammation in the body will also create inflammation in the brain. And so all these little pieces will have a huge influence to what you call higher vibration, and I call, higher levels of consciousness, because there are pieces that in the team that are not working together. Does this make sense?
Oh, yeah. I would love to just even dive deeper into how the heart brain, the belly brain affect the connection between the two. Um, we have about 5 minutes left. um, but just
Ah, yeah, I mean,
that
we were
idea.
talking we were talking about the right hemisphere earlier on, and I said that the right hemisphere accesses information from the body.
Okay.
Um, there is again a wonderful author called Amanda Blake that wrote a book, "The Body is Your Brain." I
Mm-hmm.
can highly recommend it. She is a good friend of my business partner, Anne, and I have met her. She's just delightful.
Mm.
And it's one of the things that I love about this book is really how it highlights that our body has intelligence. The
Yes.
intelligence and information that sits in our head is not the only information that we have. In fact, the body knows a lot more than the brain does.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have an inflammation in your gut and your gut health, and your whole body is not working well, it will hugely have a huge impact on also how much access you have to your emotions, because the emotions are embedded in the body. But when we're stressed and distracted or in pain, it is a lot harder to be present to how we feel. I am just recovering from a sort of sciatic nerve pinch, which was just, I mean,
Mm. Yep.
really painful sitting and standing. And I noticed that when I had that my presence as a coach and as a teacher in workshops, I was hugely impaired.
Mm-hmm.
My patience level shrinks because my body is protesting. It's giving me pain, and that has an influence on how I feel, how present I can be, and then ultimately, also impairs, the brain that I have in my head. So that's an example of how the body and the brain and the heart and the gut, how it's all, connected.
Yeah.
And of course, your teachings, help people be aware of that,
Mm-hmm.
and find solutions to some of that.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what you were speaking about, is that awareness. So, anyone listening, going through something, having a friend going through something, family members, things that are happening right now, Black Lives Matter movement, there's so much
Yes.
going on right now. And I think, like you said, that first step is just becoming aware of what's happening in the body,
Yeah.
and maybe even playing a game, just kind of like, okay, what's possibly, leading this right now? Is it my left hemisphere, my right
Yep.
hemisphere? Can I listen to my gut? Can I listen to my heart? So
Yeah,
awareness
no,
is
I agree with you, and I think the right hemisphere has a much harder time with where we find ourselves right now, because it will take in the pain of the Black Lives Matter movement. It will take in the pain of, what's happening with women. It takes in the pain of the disasters in the world, from
mhm,
wars to explosions, then COVID. It really takes in everything.
everything.
It's a lot easier for a little bit more left hemisphere neural pathway strengthened people to kind of filter that out, because that is what the left hemisphere does. It says, okay, I know this is all going on, but I'm going to just focus on this one good news right now, rather
Mhm,
than all the really challenging things that are going on. So if any of you are really struggling with the input of information, it's really looking at the gift of the left hemisphere that really goes, let's focus on one thing. What can I do? What's important now? What can I do now? What's positive right now? Which actually is another functioning of the left hemisphere, strangely enough. It has a
hmm,
tendency to positivity.
okay.
And if you are more structured and more like, okay, here is where we're going, I think the challenge there is opening our hearts to the bigger world and looking at the bigger picture of the emotions and the painful process that is going in and on in the world, and opening ourselves up to that. And that is all, again, the team of the brain is sort of working together.
Well, thank you so much. I know there's so much we could talk about, and I will make sure to connect you to everyone and everyone to you in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alexandra, very much. I appreciate you, appreciate the work that you do in this world, and it was lovely. Had a lot of fun. So
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yes, and remember, you can catch this and more at greentreeayurveda.com. Talk to you soon.